Welcome inside this special edition of the Fast Lane. Trey Lyle here with you, previewing the game of Liberty versus, for now, Conference USA member, soon to be American Athletic member. Yes, they are part of the movement. So the Mean Green, John Fields, MeanGreen247. And John, let's start right into it, starting with this North Texas offense is had its flashes of good. I think the stats are a little deceiving when you kind of look at it, but if you look game by game, they've improved throughout the season. Put 35 up against Missouri, which is an SEC defense, and that's pretty impressive, all things considered, how they played despite their struggle this season. But this is a team that likes to run the ball, runs for over 200 yards per game. So just talk about this rushing attack and how dynamic can it be?
Absolutely, man. Well, thanks for having me on first off. I appreciate the time. But yeah, I mean, it is a strong running game. It's mainly DeAndre Torrey, the senior running back, is the one that's carried a bulk of the load. And, he's been one of the top runners in the entire nation. Had a big game to start the year against Northwestern State that has obviously helped some of his numbers. He hasn't been that dominant every game, having 200 plus yards, but he's been a big key on the ground and a big key to this offense. Especially with the pass game, several wide receivers being hurt this year. That's really, taking its toll on the pass game that failed to crack 100 yards even a couple of times this year. So the run game really is a big part of it. And it all starts with DeAndre Torrey. And then there's some other guys behind him that have been banged up, whether it's Akaika Ragsdale, Isaiah Johnson, or even Ayo Adeyi. Those guys step in sporadically, but the main contributor has been Torrey.
And you talk about this running game, Liberty, just has allowed only a little over 100 yards per game off rushing compared to the 200 yards that 215 to be exact that North Texas has allowed kind of, has ran for each game. As to talk about just the importance of the running game for North Texas in order to, really have a shot in this game at home.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's going to be huge, obviously, because, as you know, Liberty's offense, they can put up points in a hurry, right? Malik Willis leading the way there. So establishing the run is probably one of the main ways North Texas can have a shot in this game, limiting the amount of times Liberty can get the ball, having those long possessions, long drives, and that kind of thing. So the run game is going to be huge, and it's going to be a big test for these guys. And some of the numbers, I think, even against Marshall are a little deceiving because Torrey ran for like 170 yards or something like that. But two of his carries went for like 130 or 140 of those yards. So realistically, it wasn't even an amazing game for the run game last week against Marshall. So they'll need to step up considerably. And it all starts up front with the offensive line, which has struggled a little bit at times this year. Coming in, it sort of felt like that was going to be one of the stronger suits of this team, one of the better lines in Conference USA, but hasn't necessarily been that way so far this year. So it's going to be a big test for those guys up front in trying to get the run game going early.
What have you seen from the quarterback Austin on this season? Obviously he's had his ups and downs, only 639 passing yards. You touched on not achieving 100 yards a couple of times. He's also susceptible to a couple interceptions through 2 against Marshall. What have you seen from him, and what does he need to deliver in this game against Liberty?
Yeah, I think the main thing, you talked about the interceptions, and we've had a chance to talk to him in press conference, and he took, full accountability for the first one, which was just a play along the sideline, rolling out. He doesn't get the ball anywhere close to throwing it away out of bounds, tries to squeeze one in, and it's just a poor decision, ends up in a pick. Second one's more of a run pass option kind of deal where the defender just gets right in there. And, it's one of those plays that's going to happen when you're playing football from time to time. The first one's completely on him, though. So just need solid decision-making from him, really. And then, you're going to need the receivers as well to make some plays. The guys that are still there that haven't been injured in that room, you're going to need those guys to step up and make plays because they've had issues with drops at times and that kind of thing, too. So it's going to take the entire offense stepping up, but it's going to start with just solid decision-making from Ani and really making those plays early, getting in a rhythm early, I think would do a lot for their confidence.
And talking about, this is a really good Liberty defense, one of the better defenses that, you can even argue maybe the best defense they've played all season. Just holistically, like how big of a challenge is it going to be? Do you expect maybe, even with that potent offense on the other side, like ball control being part of this game for North Texas because they have the strong running game? But this is, you could argue that the defense, the way they've played of late for Liberty, is the bigger challenge than the offense, despite how good the offense can be.
No, I think that's fair. I don't have the stat in front of me, but I think even the Liberty pass defense is like top 15 in the nation or something like that in yards allowed per game. They've been really effective from what I've seen in terms of the stats and that kind of thing. So it's going to be a big challenge. And North Texas has struggled a lot this year. They'll tell you this themselves on third and fourth downs, converting and that kind of thing. So if they struggle like that again and aren't able to sustain any kind of long drives, I mean, that's just going to make it that much harder on the defense. And North Texas has shown through probably the last 4 games that they've gotten behind early and they haven't been able to fully rally, even against Louisiana Tech, where they go down 24-0. They score 17 points, but they're never able to get fully back. Score a lot of fourth quarter points against against Missouri, but can never fully get back. A couple second half touchdowns against Marshall after going down 42-7 at the half. So North Texas, I think the biggest thing is just going to be breaking up that streak of going down big early. If they're able to stay in the game early and sort of find their footing, they're going to have a chance. But if Liberty gets up big, it's going to be pretty ugly. And the same story it has been for several weeks in a row, which is, now 5 straight losses for North Texas.
And Liberty coming in, not after a really good performance. They went out to that 14-0 lead as 31-point favorites against ULM, University of Louisiana Monroe, and ultimately fall in that game on a last-second field goal. But throughout the season, Liberty has had slow starts, but they've been able to kind of onslaught it late. So do you expect North Texas to try to take advantage of that? Like you talk about the slow starts for North Texas. It feels like that's the same case as we're about to get into the Liberty offense this season for the Flames.
Yeah, I don't know how much North Texas will be able to take advantage of it. They'll certainly, obviously they're going to want to get out to a hot start and just, break up this streak of really bad starts to games. But I'm not sure how much this North Texas offense has in terms of being able to do that, especially with the Liberty defense they're facing. It'll be interesting to see, right? They play the games for a reason, and that's why, even last weekend when Liberty loses to Louisiana Monroe as a huge favorite, nobody expects that. So you never really know what you're going to see. But if I was, going to bet on something happening, it wouldn't be North Texas getting out to a hot start offensively, just because we haven't seen that week in and week out just yet.
Now talking about maybe, one of the biggest challenges for this defense all season will be stopping Malik Willis. And this is a Malik Willis who's struggled of late. He's thrown 3 interceptions in the last 2 games, but this is still one of the best, most dynamic players in college football who might be, a future number 1 overall pick come next year. How big or what is the defense kind of talked about their keys in facing this kind of offense and especially facing Willis?
Yeah, I think that was a big emphasis, especially Tuesday at the press conference. Just talking to everybody, they all know who Willis is and what kind of a player he is. They talked about how dynamic he is, being able, not only to throw the ball, but being a really dynamic runner. He's got 23 total touchdowns, 14 through the air, 9 on the ground. And he's going to be a force for any defense to stop, let alone North Texas defense, which has struggled mightily, especially in first halves, going down and giving up score after score. I think they gave up 5 scores in a row to Marshall in the first half, maybe 6, 5 in a row, probably to Missouri in the first half, if I'm remembering correctly. So points have come in bunches for North Texas opponents. If they're able to make Willis uncomfortable, which is what they've said is one of the priorities, not making it easy for him, making it hard. They don't have any delusions that they'll be able to stop him completely, because nobody can with a quarterback of that caliber. But if they're able to make life difficult for him, get some pressure on him and, really force him into some tough situations, I think they'll feel good about that. But it's a tall task for any defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, an offense that it has kind of had its ebb and flows throughout the season. They've been able to quick strike very quickly, put up points very quickly. What has the defense talked about, compounding points in this one, so to say? You kind of touched on it, but like its ability to kind of slow it down and not allow, that 14 points in a 2-drive span, or even, they've allowed 6 touchdowns. I think it was 6 touchdowns in 6 drives against Marshall, like you talked about.
Yeah, I mean, they know, and we've talked about it several weeks in a row now. They know that they have to be more consistent and just make, they call it making the routine plays, basically. They know that they have to play in and play out. There can't be errors defensively to give up big plays. They've given up quite a few big play touchdowns this year, which have really killed them and made some of the scores look a lot worse than maybe they could have. Just from that standpoint. So if they're able to limit some of those big plays and, communicate and just execute the jobs that they're supposed to do, they feel like they're going to have a great chance against any team in the country. Will that play out on Saturday? Who knows? But that's their mindset, is just executing their roles properly. And they feel like if they do that, everything else is going to really take care of itself. They feel like they can do that against any offense in the country to some extent.
Well, John, prediction time, if you want to give one. 21.5-point favorites are Liberty, so about 3 touchdowns. Over under 60.5. So points appear to be going to be scoring in this one. What is your thoughts about the games, and maybe a couple keys you want to see for North Texas in this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. One of the keys that I'm getting preview story together right now that I'll be coming out with later today, but one of the keys for me is that run game that you talked about. If they're able to establish the run early, get that first down on their first drive, because they've struggled on early drives offensively before being able to get into it. So if they're able to really get it going, especially with the run game early on, and that just builds out to more success offensively, being able to see some of those 3rd and 4th down conversions, see some of that turnaround and take an uptick this week is also going to be a key. And then defensively, they're going to have to limit those big plays as much as they can and make sure those plays don't turn into touchdowns, because if an offense sputters, they can punt the ball away. They can have ways to get out of it that don't result instantly in a touchdown. If a defense makes a big mistake like that, it turns into 6 points. So on the defensive side, they just have to be able to limit those big play touchdowns and, really play complementary football across the board. I mean, if I was going to pick, in terms of the spread, I think I would pick North Texas. I think I'd still pick them to cover the spread potentially here. I think they've got a decent chance of doing that. 21.5 points feels big. Even with how badly the Marshall game played out last week, I just have a feeling these guys are going to come out motivated to play. And, even against Missouri, they were able to cover the spread late when they found some success. So, I mean, with Liberty coming off that close loss to Monroe, North Texas coming off a blowout, I have a feeling they'll be able to cover, but I still think I'd pick Liberty to win this game. I don't have a definitive score prediction at this point, but I am picking North Texas to cover. And maybe that's foolish because I picked them to beat Marshall last week and we saw how that turned out. But at this point, I'd pick North Texas to cover, but Liberty to win.
I get that. Well, I picked Liberty to win 35-0 last week. So let's just say we're even. So let's just say, well, John, thank you so much. You talked about the game preview coming out. If listeners want to learn more about the Mean Green, how can they connect with you, online?
Absolutely. So the Twitter page for the website is at MeanGreen247. My Twitter is at JohnField0. So you follow along there. I'll be promoting all the stories on there and putting them all out. And then, so I put out content for MeanGreen247. It's, so if you just follow the Twitter page there, check that out. We'll have all the articles posted on there as they come out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As always, you can connect with me at TreyLyleVT and at Fastlane Ed Lane, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Thank you so much for listening to this special edition of the Fastlane.